in Florida would we have such a unique process available to us. And every 20 years, this opportunity is presented. And many of you were probably around in '98, didn't pay much attention to that event. I'm sure many of you weren't around in '78 and paid less attention to that event. But this is what the state has ordained as a way by which we can clean up the Constitution occasionally, kind of keep ourselves current and updated. And these people have what you really can characterize as almost unlimited authority. They are not constrained by a single subject. They are not given any direction as to how they develop the ideas that are put forth to the ballot. They are simply assembled for a period of time, and they make recommendations. So I think, having lived in Tallahassee and lobbied since 1981, I'm here not as a fearmonger, but only to say there's no end to bad ideas. Anyone who has lobbied over that period of time has seen most and many of those bad ideas, and fortunately the legislature and the governor act as a little bit of a screen and a filter, and they don't become law. One of the beauties of being a lobbyist, of course, is usually it's less than 20% of the great ideas sponsored and filed become law. And so you get some comfort from all of that. This conference has talked about a whole panoply of things, had even some nut up here suggesting we drink wastewater. We've had people talk about the need for billions and billions of dollars for whatever alternative water supply. We've talked about all of the horrors of nitrogen and phosphorus. But when you think about the entire breadth of the Florida Constitution and the subject areas that are open for debate, it is a daunting task to consider what the electorate may have to consider in November of 2018. And I always like to say that the worst form of government is plebiscite. So it's pretty important what the Constitutional Revision Commission puts forth, because it just goes to the people. And that ballot summary, that whatever soundbite it may be in terms of changing the Florida Constitution, is then left to the voters and the 60% potential obligation that it becomes law almost forever. Well, why are we at a water forum, fear-mongering, on the Constitutional Revision Commission? And I think we've seen in real life that the environment and natural resource protection are weighty issues that the public in particular can be swayed and does have passionate opinions. And therefore, when one puts together an Amendment 1, or one puts together a proposition to change how we as a state govern those subject areas, you can imagine that there is a fair probability that if an issue gets on the ballot, it will potentially receive a 60% approval. So the premise of my entire speech is it could happen. You think and you'd like to believe better, but given what's happened over time, I think it's a different kind of world from what the 1968 Constitutional Revision Commission envisioned when they put forth this structure of a 20-year look-see and a revisit. I think right now in front of us, if you read the newspapers, you can certainly anticipate that this poor, pitiful commission is going to wrestle with marijuana. They're going to wrestle with court reform, judicial appointments. They'll probably wrestle with automatic weapons. They'll be asked about income tax. They'll be presented any variety of issues which have percolated at one time or another over the last 20 to 40 years and just may not have got to that tipping point. One of the interesting things about the commission, of course, is that I tell you it's 37 people. Well, 33 people will be appointed by the governor and by the presiding officers of the Florida House and Senate. So you get some comfort, if you take comfort, in who the governor and the president and the speaker of the House are, that they're going to appoint very wise people. Curiously, in the mix, there is really only one elected official who serves on the commission, and that's the Attorney General. Everyone else is there as a surrogate of someone else who may have been elected. So it's a kind of interesting blend of democracy that we use. The background, just quickly for folks who probably didn't wake up this morning worried about the Constitutional Revision Commission, is that in February of 2017, these appointments are to be made. The group would be assembled sometime in April of 2017, and then they go on a road show. They travel about the state and they inquire of the populace the issues of the day and solicit the suggestions as to what needs to be changed in the Florida Constitution. And they'll do that through June of 2018. And at that point, the provisions which created them says they shall make recommendations to go forth onto the November 2018 ballot. So it's a relatively short window, and kind of, if you're interested in public service and you want to put forth a good 12 to 15 months of listening to every Tom, Dick, and Harry come forth with good and bad ideas on the Florida Constitution, this is really your opportunity. I think right now, I tried to check, there's 51 applicants, pool of people who have presented themselves to those appointers for purposes of potential appointment on the commission. Historically, that's going to increase, and I believe we'll probably end up with a couple hundred, maybe 300 some odd applicants that will be vetted and screened. In any event, background-wise, 1978, the commission 0 for 7. They deliberated and came up with 7 outstanding suggestions of revision, and the electorate rejected each of them. So that everybody probably felt safe the next morning, and that was what happened, notwithstanding, again, another year and a half of deliberation. They learned some lessons, and by 1998, it's a Hall of Fame deal. They are 8 for 9. So if history tells us anything, there's a higher probability that the issues that get through the commission may well have some success with the electorate based on the story of 1998. Significant difference, of course, is during that intervening period, you now need 60% to pass, and that will remain true. Even with the commission ballot initiatives, they will require 60% of the popular vote to win. So Mr. Morgan will remind you that on radio ads over the next couple of months. But there's 60% requirement, and the unknown is how will the commission decide to put forth the issue onto the ballot. They have no obligation, as it stands today, to have a supermajority passage from within the commission. What they did in '98 was that if 10 members of the commission considered an issue worthy, it went to a vote of the commission to consider whether it should then go forth to the public. That's a pretty light requirement, and it has been suggested and debated. If we have a supermajority requirement for ultimate passage, shouldn't we have a supermajority requirement from within the commission? So again, the great unknowns about this body and its mysterious activities is, well, what about the Sunshine Law? Does it apply? Doesn't specifically apply under Florida law. And the procedural rules by which they deliberate are to be established primarily by the executive director appointed by the governor. And so you can find yourselves with a Dexter Douglas. Dexter Douglas was the executive director of the Lawton Childs Governed Constitutional Revision Commission. And from what I understand, if Dexter liked it, it went. If Dexter didn't like it, it didn't go. So that was power invested as a result of just the dynamic of the individuals and the personalities and the trust and the confidence that folks had instilled in him. I think the bizarre circumstance is social media. If you think back 20 years and you think about organizing a statewide effort, a genuine inquiry of what changes should be made, fundamental changes in how Florida relates to its citizens. 1998 wasn't that long ago to some of us, but when you think about it, there was a Clinton in the White House in 1998. Maybe that's not so different. We got introduced to a woman in a blue dress. That was almost all year in 1998 as the impeachment proceedings were debated. California eliminated smoking in its bars and restaurants. That was visionary activity in 1998. Windows 98 was introduced. A company called Google was founded in 1998. And Mark McGwire passed Roger Maris in the home run annual battle. Steroids aside, the point being that social media is now so pervasive, and the ability to kind of influence the populace and to generate popular sentiment and support is something that clearly our 1978 and our 1998 Constitutional Commission, they would assemble people like you in some sort of Kiwanis Club room and have a public hearing, but it wouldn't be live streamed and podcast and tweeted and blogged and everything else that's going to now be associated with this effort. So I just think that that has a significant uncertainty that it brings to the equation as to what is this going to look like? How is this going to turn out? Because in the intervening period, we've also seen that money can actually influence a policy outcome. We have incurred or experienced billionaires who take hold of an issue and do what they need to do to publicize the issue, to generate grassroots support for it. And so you could well imagine that that kind of person with that kind of passion and conviction could look at this as a tremendous opportunity. And so I fear that the influence of some is going to be very disproportionate in terms of where the debate gets directed and what are the topics that this commission ends up having to wrestle with. So if you want to advance change, or if you've got a great idea, I suggest you get that application in. February is around the corner. If you'd like to stop some bad ideas and participate, I suggest you get that application in and present yourself as a person capable of deliberating these issues. And as a group, AIF, the James Madison Institute, the Florida Chamber, the great think tanks of Florida business really need to participate throughout the duration of that process, so that I think there is a diverse and a broad-based input that's provided. I don't know how many of you are the 75% of the people who passed the Amendment 1 and the Land Amendment last go-round, but I can imagine that there are folks who are still thinking about how that could have been better focused or improved upon. We heard Greg Munson talk about the litigation and what may or may not have been defects or defaults in that. But when you look forward, I just want to assure you that at this point in time, with the legislature being kind of a safeguard in many respects to ensure that extreme action isn't instantaneously adopted, that the Constitutional Revision Commission is something that warrants your attention, because some of us represent unpopular commodities. Some of us are the subject of, well, you know, why don't we tax those people for what it is that they do? That's not new news to some of you. Maybe we should take all those non-GMO products and put 5 cents a pound tax on that. Maybe we don't like bottled water. Maybe that's something that the state of Florida just shouldn't countenance. Maybe we should ban septic tanks altogether. Maybe that's been the root of all evil and we just haven't discovered it. And you know, what about that Commissioner of Agriculture? Does he really need to be a cabinet member? There was a Commissioner of Education in 1997, and then there wasn't as a result of the Constitutional Revision Commission. So I just point out to you that there are a lot of different possible directions, a lot of possible, almost unlimited subject areas that are ripe for attention in the course of the deliberations of the Constitutional Revision Commission. So the message, once again, is it could happen.